Hello, my friends, and welcome. I am in San Miguel de Allende, where Julia and I are helping out with a literary festival here. And I haven't had a chance to really drop into the field for the past couple weeks, not really for lack of time, but more just stress load. And when you're really stressed and dysregulated, um, it's hard to find that moment of grounding and coherence to be able to tap into a field of resonance and kind of speak from that place. So I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to do that now. Something I've been thinking about this morning is storytelling not as communication, but as technology that facilitates coherence and presence. And I think one of the things that's bringing this up was an article in Forbes by Otto Scharmer, who's the founder and head of the Presencing Institute at MIT. Um, and his whole body of work, which is amazing, he has a book called Leading from the Emergent Future that I really love, is that, you know, instead of just downloading information and applying it to a situation, right, where traditional leadership development has looked backwards and said, okay, here are the best practices. Now we apply them as quickly and efficiently as possible to maximize profit. That his body of work is around sensing what a system needs, releasing assumptions, listening deeply, and moving from that place of emergence, but that the first piece of that is deep presencing. And he talks about listening as a tool for that, meditation, all sorts of sense making. And as I was reading this article, I really had this moment of reconnecting with this old idea, right, that comes from the days of oral storytelling, where when you share a story, it's not just information, it is a resonant field, right? And that, Western science backs this up. When you are in the presence of a gifted, grounded storyteller, a couple of things happen, right? One is neural coupling, where your brain, your respiration, even sometimes your heartbeat syncs up with the storytellers. And the other is a hormone released of oxytocin being our empathy hormone. And that when these two things happen, there is a deep sense of presence that emerges. I was thinking as I was sitting with this morning of the first time that I performed my solo storytelling show, which was called Ceremony. I was like super terrified and it got out there and I began sharing the story that I'd been rehearsing for, you know, at least 3 months at that point. And at a certain point, the story took over, and I felt the moment that it hooked into the audience, right? And this audience was a combination of strangers and people who I'd known for my entire life and new friends. And so they'd come in not quite knowing what to expect. And as the story took over, it's almost like it wove a spell around all of us so that we were all in the same space together. And by the end of it, right, when the lights went down after the last line of the show, which was really just a story, there was silence for a few beats. And then, everybody clapped because they're at a show and that's what you do. But that silence was so rich. And in that silence was a place of deep presence and deep coherence in the group because we had all been sucked into the story that I was stewarding through my body, through my experience, through my voice. And I think when in leadership development or leadership training, they talk about story, they're thinking about it and teaching it as clear communication. And that is the least interesting part of story. Going back to a theme that's woven its way throughout these episodes, AI can do clear communication just as well, if not better than we can, but it can't cast a spell. It can't generate this coherent field that invites people into a shared sense of presence, right? And that when people are in that place of presence now, right, we can be in that place to sense emergence and move into strategic thinking. This is one of the reasons that I work with stories so much when I'm doing leadership work or when I'm doing work with teams. That if we jump straight into the strategy, we're moving from what Otto Scharmer usually moving from what he would call the downloading place, right? We're working from our existing frame of reference. We're working from what's worked before or our ideas. When we drop beneath that, which is what story lets us do, suddenly we're starting from a new place where actual change can be honored, change can emerge, something deeper starts to happen. There's another aspect that comes as I think about this, which is that we're at this this literary festival in San Miguel de Allende, and they have all this stuff about publishing and poetry and writing memoir and everything you can imagine, writing fiction, science fiction. And then over to the side, they have a wellness tent where people can go do wellness things, whatever, meditate, yoga, probably get a massage, whatever it might be. But I think there's maybe one workshop that I'm assisting with that integrates these things, that integrates deep presencing, breath, right? Even moving and dancing with flowers or grass or trees, with creativity, with writing, with poetry. The same thing happens in the workplace, right? We might have a well-being activity, we might have a sound bath, and then we do our strategic stuff. But they're the same thing. If we think of that idea of presencing, whether it's through story, whether it's through breath work, whether it's through a sound journey, and then use that as a gateway to whatever the tactical thing is that we need to do, then suddenly we're melding heart and mind and body. We're not separating them, which is an artificial construct anyway. So it's really interesting that there's so much, even in really progressive, uh, organizations, teams, and leadership development, there tends to be still a lot of separation. Yes, we're going to tend to our spirit, and then we'll do the tactical thing. Those are the same, right? One feeds the other. At the center of emergent strategy, at the center of a really, powerful game-changing plan, there is deep presence, right? There's a deep shift of consciousness. And at the center of a deep shift of consciousness and deep presence, there is strategy, right? There is kind of a linear structure that wants to emerge. It's, the classical visual for this would be the yin yang symbol. And yet we know this, and there's a resistance to it in the culture because it's scary. It's scary to admit that one of the most powerful leadership tools we may have is nonlinear and is a practice rather than an outcome, is both linear and nonlinear at the same time. And yet that's where we get the best information. One of the things that I've also been thinking about, and I wrote about this in LinkedIn. It's been a while since I recorded one of these, so I may have spoken about it here as well, is that so much of what we think of as leadership development really only emerged post-World War II. And the structures that emerged post-World War II, that these leadership development and team development frameworks were based on, that world was remarkably politically and economically stable. Whether we agree with that stability or not is a different conversation, but it was and has been stable. Well, that's no longer the case. And there's all sorts of acronyms that people are coming up with for this, whether it's VUCA or BANI or whatever. But the fact is that with all of these systems crumbling, then looking backwards to apply best practices simply is not effective anymore. So we need new ways, which are actually old ways, right? In a lot of indigenous cultures, I forget where I read about this, but I found it fascinating that, and I believe this, it's in, I don't want to mess it up. It's either South America or somewhere in Africa, but I think it occurs all over the world in indigenous cultures that sometimes there's not like a single leader, right? That leadership rotates based on the needs of the community, a spring leader, a winter leader, a war leader, a peace leader. And there's also when a leader steps down or passes on, sometimes a tribe or a nation will go for a time without a leader, and the new leader isn't elected, but emerges organically through conversation. Where sometimes, if you were an outside observer, you wouldn't even really catch what's going on. There's a conversation, stories are exchanged over the period of a few months, and then as if spontaneously, but really it's been through a mycelial process of communication and deep sensing into the needs of the community, a new leader emerges. So there's a lot of old ways that we can tap into, not in an appropriate way, but in a way that we can say, oh, I'm inspired by that. I'm inspired by the power of story to create so much coherence that change emerges seemingly on its own, but really supported by the community, by the co-creation of story. To bring us back to that original idea of story as spellcasting, we can bring in that idea of co-creation. So storytelling and co-creative storytelling as a core leadership capacity, not just as communication, but as deep presencing and coherence, that when a leader has the ability to weave a spell with their story, to bring people in, to invite people into the story so that the story actually develops and has and takes on a consciousness of its own, then the next step would be to invite co-creation, right? So that everybody becomes part of the story. We establish the coherence. From that coherence, we start to co-create. And from that co-creation emerges strategy, emerges tactics that are deeply ingrained in the energy and ethos of the group and informed by spirit. And that spirit piece is what's missing from Otto Scharmer's construct. I don't for a minute think that he believes it's not there. I just think that because the Presencing Institute is situated within MIT, he has to remain legible to the existing system. But there's a point in Theory U, which is exactly what it sounds like, right? At the bottom of the U, there is a moment that he thinks of and calls threading a needle, where you're asked to surrender all of your assumptions and sit in a place of deep unknowing, which is incredibly challenging to do. And without spirit, it's also incredibly lonely. We're not meant to do that alone. And the thing that can help us in that moment of not knowing, of complete confusion, is surrender to spirit, saying, I'm here to be led, right? Um, I'm here for guidance. And that can help us. That can make the uncertainty much more bearable. Now, story is one way of kind of signal boosting so that spirit can come in through that co-creative process. So if you think of story as one layer, then when we really activate the power of story, spirit and consciousness can come in and guide us. So that as the story is co-created, it's almost as if consciousness and spirit is speaking through each person in their unique way, so that what wants to emerge can be expressed and all the puzzle pieces come together. And I think that's so, so powerful. And it's something that AI can never, ever, ever do. So again, I'm back to this theme of what is the invitation of, what we've talked about here before is the age of rehumaning. What does it mean to really think about story, really think about breath, really think about vibration, not just as coherence, but that coherence as a gateway or a doorway to everything, right? To spirit, to consciousness, to a really, really beautiful future. So those are some things I'm sitting with. Thank you as always for listening. And I hope to see you here again soon.